The sun hung low over the military training grounds, casting long shadows across the asphalt and sand of the firing range. Private Alex Carter adjusted his helmet, the weight feeling heavier than usual. Today was a routine rifle drill, but he sensed the tension in the air like static electricity. The unit moved with mechanical precision, lining up behind their assigned targets. Captain Harlan prowled between the lanes, a predator in polished boots, eyes flicking from soldier to soldier, assessing, calculating, looking for weaknesses. Alex's hands tightened around his M16. Every detail mattered, the grip, the stance, the calm breath before the shot. He had practiced for hours yesterday and the day before, each round fired at targets hundreds of meters away. Accuracy was his strength, precision was his armor. Yet, as he set his sights and squeezed the trigger, the rifle refused to respond. Metallic click echoed, not the sharp crack he expected. Alex's heart sank. He pulled the trigger again, harder this time. Nothing. Panic prickled at his spine as the rifle jammed entirely. Behind him, the squad erupted into laughter, sharp and cruel, echoing off the concrete walls of the range. He could feel their eyes on him, and the weight of their amusement settled like lead in his chest. Having trouble, Private Carter, Captain Harlan's voice sliced through the air like a whip. He stepped closer, his polished boots clicking against the concrete. His smirk was deliberate, cruel, and Alex could feel the sting of his gaze like fire. Maybe this weapon is too much for you to handle. Alex's jaw tightened, but he forced himself to stay composed. The humiliation was intense, burning hot, but he refused to give the captain the satisfaction of a reaction. The officer turned away, satisfied with his display of dominance, leaving Alex to fumble with the jammed weapon under the scrutinizing eyes of his peers. He felt sweat bead at his temples. His heart pounded not just from embarrassment, but from the simmering anger he couldn't yet release. Something about the rifle felt off. He knew his own hands were steady, his aim flawless. He hadn't failed. Someone else had made him look weak, exposed him in front of the unit. Alex's mind raced. Captain Harlan had always been cruel, but this was different. Subtle, targeted. The smallest adjustments in the weapon could ruin performance without leaving obvious evidence. Alex had read about it in manuals, tampering with the sear, loosening the firing pin, altering the trigger tension, enough to make a rifle jam when most expected it to fire flawlessly, and the captain had done it to him. Drill ended and soldiers filed out, some sneering, some shaking their heads at Alex's failure. But Alex didn't leave. He crouched behind a barrier, inspecting the rifle. Every screw, every latch, every surface he could access seemed normal, yet he knew better. His instincts, honed from months of rigorous training, whispered the truth. The rifle had been sabotaged. His chest rose and fell as he fought to calm himself. The humiliation was sharp, but beneath it burned a quiet fire, a determination that would not be ignored. The laughter, the sneers, the condescending remarks of the captain, they were fuel, not for revenge, not yet, but for focus. He would prove himself. He would make the captain pay, not with impulsive anger, but with precision, control, and undeniable truth. As he cleaned the weapon in the small storage shed later that day, Alex replayed every movement, every step he had taken on the range. He analyzed the drill from every angle, the positioning of the officers, the way the squad reacted, the timing of Captain Harlan's smirk. Every detail mattered. He had a plan forming in the back of his mind, tentative but growing clearer. He would watch, wait, and learn. Every sabotage, every cruel joke, every small victory the captain took would be logged in his mind like a map leading to the inevitable. Barracks were quiet that evening, the hum of fluorescent lights the only sound. Alex lay on his bunk, staring at the ceiling, replaying the scene endlessly. The laughter of the squad, the sneer of the captain, the sound of the jammed rifle, each detail etched into memory. Others would have crumbled under such humiliation, swallowed it, let it erode their confidence. Not Alex. He had never been one to bow under pressure, to let injustice stand unchallenged. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees bordering the base, carrying with it the faint echo of training exercises and distant engines. Alex imagined the captain, smug and untouchable, believing he had won. But in that moment, as the quiet night settled around him, Alex made a vow, a silent promise that the humiliation he endured today would not define him. He would take control, and the day would come when the tables would turn. He drifted into restless sleep, dreams filled with rifles, targets, and calculated moves. Each scene sharpened his instincts. Each imagined maneuver rehearsed strategies that might one day bring the captain to justice. It wasn't revenge in its raw, violent form. It was preparation, patience, and precision. Alex's mind was already working, even in sleep, plotting a course that would make the captain's cruelty his undoing. The morning light crept through the barracks window. Alex rose with purpose. The humiliation of yesterday was still a shadow, but the fire it ignited was brighter than any doubt or fear. Today he would continue to train, to study, to observe. Every movement of the captain, every small detail of the unit's routines, every flaw in their systems. He would note it, catalog it, and store it like ammunition for the day justice could be served. And somewhere deep inside, a quiet, cold smile formed on Alex's lips. Captain Harlan had made one critical mistake. He had underestimated the private he humiliated. That mistake, Alex knew, could cost him everything. The morning sun had barely touched the horizon when Alex Carter was already awake, methodical in his movements. While the rest of the barracks slept, he ran through drills in the empty courtyard, rifle in hand, every motion precise, almost ritualistic. The memory of the firing range yesterday burned like fire in his chest, the laughter, the sneers, the smirk of Captain Harlan, and he refused to let it fade. He ran through the exercise over and over, imagining the rifle jamming at every possible angle. He checked every piece of equipment, every bolt and latch, silently cataloging the ways a weapon could betray its user. But this wasn't about fear of failure anymore. It was about control, about never letting someone humiliate him again. Alex moved to the armory, slipping past the dim lights and empty corridors. The smell of oil and metal hung in the air, comforting in its familiarity. Here he was in control. He inspected each rifle assigned to the squad, noting small anomalies that others would overlook: a scratch in the sear, a screw slightly misaligned, faint smudges on the trigger. His pulse quickened. The sabotage wasn't an accident. Captain Harlan was methodical, cruel, and he targeted the same soldiers over and over. Other soldiers began to notice Alex staying late, observing him curiously as he meticulously disassembled and inspected weapons. A few whispered warnings: "Don't make waves. Let it go, Carter. It's not worth it." Alex smiled faintly, almost imperceptibly. They didn't understand. This wasn't about defiance. It was about preparation, about learning the rules before he broke them in the only way that would matter. He sat on a crate, rifle parts spread around him like pieces of a puzzle. Each small observation added to a mental map: which weapons had been tampered with, which soldiers had been humiliated, how the captain's cruelty manifested in predictable patterns. He realized with a cold clarity that the captain's arrogance was also a weakness. He underestimated those he bullied, never suspecting that quiet, observant soldiers like Alex could see the patterns he left behind. That afternoon, during another training session, Alex observed the captain closely, noting his gestures, the way he leaned toward certain soldiers, the barely perceptible shift of his eyes when a rifle was about to fail. He cataloged everything: timing, position, even how the sunlight hit the targets. Every detail was a piece of leverage he intended to use. In the barracks later, Alex lay on his bunk, staring at the ceiling. His mind churned with scenarios, rehearsals, and contingency plans. He didn't allow anger to cloud his judgment. It had to fuel precision. Every strategy required patience. A snap decision now could ruin him, but a measured one could end Harlan's reign of terror. He imagined confronting the captain, imagining his hand snapping in controlled force, the shock rippling through the unit, the whispers of disbelief turning to awe. But that was still a vision, not reality. He reached for a notebook, one he had hidden in his locker. Carefully, he wrote down the details of the sabotage, incidents he had witnessed, small injustices others might overlook, names of soldiers who had suffered silently. The notebook became his arsenal, a quiet record of injustice that would someday speak louder than a shout. Later, during meal formation, Captain Harlan walked past, his gaze flicking briefly to Alex. The smirk was still there, but now Alex saw it differently. It wasn't just cruelty, it was arrogance, a dangerous kind of arrogance that assumed all under him were weak and compliant. That arrogance, Alex realized, was fragile, and it could be broken. Evenings were spent in shadowed corners of the base, observing, waiting, learning. Alex watched how soldiers reacted, noting who feared the captain, who remained indifferent, and who silently suffered. Patterns emerged. Harlan's behavior was predictable, guided by pride and habit rather than logic. Alex's mind traced paths of leverage, small openings where justice could strike without exposing himself prematurely. He began to train mentally as well as physically, running through confrontations in his mind. Each scenario was analyzed. What if the captain reacted violently? What if he called for reinforcements? How would the squad respond if Alex acted decisively? He ran through it all with precision, learning the rhythms of fear, authority, and control. Night fell and the barracks grew quiet. Soldiers slept, exhausted from training, unaware that the most dangerous storm was brewing silently among them. Alex sat on his bunk, reviewing every detail in his mind. He clenched his fists, not in rage but in preparation. Each knot of anger and humiliation was a tool, sharpened by discipline and foresight. Before sleep claimed him, he whispered to himself, a vow quiet but unbreakable: "You think you've won, Harlan. You've humiliated me, but this ends on my terms, and when it does, no one will ever doubt me again." Outside, the wind carried faint echoes of distant exercises, a rhythmic reminder of order and discipline. But Alex's mind was elsewhere, inside a carefully plotted storm, one that would turn cruelty into accountability, humiliation into justice. The fire of yesterday had not only survived, it had grown into something cold, precise, and unstoppable. As he finally drifted into a restless sleep, dreams played scenes of confrontation. The captain's smirk, the jammed rifles, the eyes of soldiers frozen in shock, and the careful, deliberate strike that would end the torment. Every dream was rehearsal. Every imagined outcome honed his instincts. By morning, Alex would rise not as the humiliated soldier, but as someone prepared for what needed to come, the quiet fury in his chest burning brighter than fear or doubt. The next morning, Alex Carter woke with a sharpened focus. Every movement was deliberate, every action purposeful. Yesterday's drills, the captain's smirk, the laughter of the squad, all played in his mind like a slow-motion loop. He knew the humiliation he endured was only the tip of the iceberg. There was a pattern here, one he intended to uncover. After the morning formation, Alex slipped to the armory under the guise of cleaning his rifle. The room smelled of oil, metal, and sweat, a scent that had always calmed him. Rows of weapons gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, each one a tool, a weapon, a puzzle. Alex began systematically inspecting the rifles assigned to the squad. Every screw, latch, and trigger mechanism was scrutinized, every tiny detail cataloged in his mind. It didn't take long for patterns to emerge. Rifles previously issued to him, when tested, showed subtle signs of tampering. Triggers slightly stiff, firing pins misaligned, minor adjustments in the sights. Nothing obvious enough for a casual inspection, but enough to ruin performance when the pressure was on. And Alex knew he wasn't the only target. He recognized the marks of someone deliberately testing authority, deliberately humiliating soldiers they considered weaker. He took meticulous notes in a hidden notebook, detailing serial numbers, anomalies, and the soldiers who had been issued the rifles. His pulse quickened. The realization hit him like a cold wave. This wasn't personal alone. Captain Harlan had been doing this for months, maybe years, manipulating and humiliating soldiers who dared to show competence or independence. He had created a network of fear, keeping the unit under his thumb with subtle sabotage and psychological torment. Alex spent hours cross-referencing logs, quietly interviewing fellow soldiers during downtime. Some were hesitant, fearful of reprisal. Others nodded, sharing whispered tales of rifles that jammed, targets mysteriously missed, small humiliations that had seemed accidental at the time. Each story confirmed what Alex suspected. Harlan's cruelty was systematic, deliberate, and most importantly, documented. The more Alex uncovered, the colder and more precise his thinking became. He was no longer reacting, he was planning. Every sabotage, every subtle humiliation, every cruel smirk would be accounted for. This was no longer about revenge, it was about dismantling a predator with his own arrogance as the tool. Alex understood one thing clearly. Harlan believed himself untouchable because no one had yet dared to gather proof, to confront him strategically. Alex intended to change that. By late afternoon, Alex had compiled a map of the unit's rifles, noting the modifications and who had been affected. He discovered patterns in Harlan's movements, too. The captain favored moments of stress, drills under observation, and situations where embarrassment would be maximized. Alex began predicting where Harlan would strike next, almost like anticipating a chess opponent's moves several steps ahead. Mental rehearsal became obsession. Alex imagined confronting the captain, not with rash anger but with precision like a surgeon. He pictured the shock on Harlan's face, the disbelief in the eyes of the squad, the ripple effect as truth began to surface. He ran scenarios in his mind over and over, refining the timing, the method, the evidence needed to ensure nothing could be twisted against him. At evening, Alex lingered in the barracks after lights out, his notebook open and flashlight illuminating the meticulous records he had gathered. Names, rifle numbers, dates, specific sabotages, all laid bare. Each page was a testament to Harlan's cruelty, a quiet map of injustice waiting to be executed. The weight of it was heavy, but Alex felt no fear. Instead, he felt control, the satisfaction of knowing the next step was entirely in his hands. Sleep came fitfully, dreams filled with rifle drills, precise movements, and the silent, cold glare of the captain. Alex saw himself standing at the range again, this time in control, orchestrating the moment when humiliation would be replaced with accountability. Each nightmare reinforced his resolve, each imagined scenario a rehearsal for reality. By dawn, Alex rose with the calm certainty of a soldier who knew exactly what needed to be done. The fire that had been lit during the humiliating drill had grown into a steel-edged purpose. He moved through the base methodically, noting the captain's habits, predicting movements, and observing interactions. Every glance Harlan cast, every smirk, every subtle gesture was cataloged in Alex's mind, feeding the strategy he was developing. He realized that patience was his greatest weapon. A hasty move could destroy everything, but timing, precision, and leverage could dismantle the captain's authority entirely. Alex did not seek chaos, he sought methodical justice. He practiced calm expressions, even while the anger simmered beneath the surface, ready to explode at the precise moment. Later, during a routine weapons inspection with the squad, Alex quietly demonstrated competence, checking every rifle with care and precision. Some soldiers gave him curious looks, noticing his intensity, but Alex gave nothing away. Harlan, overseeing the inspection, allowed his arrogance to mask any suspicion. The captain believed he was untouchable, yet he had no idea that Alex had mapped every move, documented every act of sabotage, and was rehearsing a confrontation that would leave him exposed. By nightfall, Alex had drawn up mental and physical maps of the range, the barracks, and Harlan's habits. He knew which moments were isolated, which were vulnerable, and which would require absolute discretion. Each piece of evidence, every calculated observation, brought him closer to the point of no return, the moment when he would reclaim control, expose the truth, and end the cycle of humiliation that had plagued him and others. As he lay on his bunk that night, notebook clutched to his chest, Alex felt a strange calm. The fire of humiliation had burned through his fear, leaving in its place something colder, sharper, and far more dangerous: clarity. He would not act impulsively. He would not let anger blind him. Instead, he would strike with precision, timing, and undeniable truth. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees bordering the base, carrying the faint echoes of training exercises. To anyone else, it was just another night at the barracks. To Alex, it was the calm before a storm he had meticulously planned for. A storm that would finally turn the tables on Captain Harlan, and no one, not even the captain, would see it coming. The morning was crisp, the kind of cold that sharpened the mind and stiffened the body. Alex Carter moved through the training grounds like a shadow, every step measured, every breath controlled. The air carried the faint metallic scent of gunpowder from the previous day's drills. He watched as Captain Harlan paced among the soldiers, barking instructions with his usual arrogance, unaware that Alex's careful planning had reached its critical point. Alex's rifle rested against his shoulder, but today it was not just a tool. It was a symbol of control, a weapon of precision and focus. Every glance he cast was deliberate, every movement was calculated. He had rehearsed this moment countless times in his mind, running scenarios in slow motion, predicting Harlan's reactions, and mapping escape routes, backup witnesses, and contingencies. Failure was not an option. The training exercise began. Soldiers lined up, rifles at the ready, the target range stretching hundreds of meters in front of them. Harlan moved between the ranks, his sharp eyes scanning for mistakes, for weakness, for the moment he could assert dominance. Alex felt his pulse quicken, not from fear, but anticipation. The humiliation he had suffered yesterday, and the months of quiet observation and preparation, all coalesced into this precise instant. As Harlan approached, Alex's mind ran over the plan one last time. He would not act impulsively. He would not lose control. The captain's hand, the symbol of his authority, would be the first to feel the consequences of his cruelty. The strike would be swift, surgical, undeniable. And then, the truth of Harlan's sabotage, meticulously documented, would emerge to support Alex's actions. "Private Carter," Harlan barked, his voice sharp and mocking. "Make sure that rifle of yours actually works this time." He smirked, the same cruel expression that had haunted Alex since yesterday, a taunt meant to unnerve. But Alex did not flinch. He did not respond. Instead, he kept his movements smooth, confident, his gaze steady. And Harlan extended his hand to adjust Alex's stance. The moment arrived. Alex's hand shot forward, catching Harlan's wrist in a firm grip. In one precise, controlled motion, he twisted. There was a sharp, sickening crack, a sound that echoed across the range and silenced everyone in an instant. The captain's scream rang out, a mixture of shock, pain, and disbelief. Soldiers froze mid-motion, eyes wide, mouths agape. The smirk was gone. Harlan's face contorted in a way Alex had never seen before: helplessness, vulnerability, and fear. Alex held his stance, breathing evenly, maintaining the calm he had rehearsed. "I warned you," he said quietly, his voice steady. "Enough games." The squad looked on, stunned, unable to reconcile the image of their authoritative captain being physically overpowered by a single private. Harlan stumbled backward, clutching his broken hand, rage and disbelief mixing with the shock of sudden vulnerability. His usual composure and arrogance had evaporated, leaving him exposed before his own soldiers. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by Harlan's muttered curses and the distant clatter of rifles. Military instinct took over for some soldiers. They reached for radios, calling for medics and command. Others simply stared, frozen, unable to process what had just occurred. Alex stepped back calmly, placing the rifle carefully on the ground, his movements deliberate, almost ceremonial. He had not struck in anger, but with purpose. Every action was controlled, undeniable, and documented in the mental ledger he had kept meticulously. As Harlan was assisted away, grimacing, Alex allowed himself a brief inward exhale. The first strike had been executed perfectly. No impulsive rage, no uncontrolled violence, just precise, calculated justice. And yet, even as adrenaline surged, a sense of cautious awareness settled over him. The military police would arrive soon, questions would be asked, and interpretations could vary. His preparation had to extend beyond this moment. Back in the barracks later, whispers spread like wildfire. Some soldiers quietly admired him, others whispered fearfully about what might come next. Alex did not boast, did not revel in the moment. Instead, he reviewed every detail in his mind, cataloging responses, noting witness reactions, and anticipating scrutiny. This was not the end. It was the first decisive move in a careful campaign. Harlan's shrill complaints echoed through the base, carried by soldiers, gossip, and frantic phone calls to higher command. Alex's quiet satisfaction was tempered by awareness. He had acted, yes, but exposure to consequences was inevitable. Still, the groundwork he had laid, the documentation of past sabotage, the mental map of patterns, all ensured he could justify every move with clarity. As night fell, Alex sat alone on his bunk, reviewing every interaction of the day. Every reaction, every stunned gaze, every whisper became part of the mental map of what came next. The strike had been decisive, but the war was far from over. Harlan's authority had been broken in one hand, but his influence and network of allies within the unit could still pose threats. Preparation, patience, and precision remained paramount. Yet a quiet satisfaction lingered. The humiliation that had haunted Alex since the firing range was no longer his burden. It had been transformed into a tool, a weapon, a catalyst. The strike was more than physical, it was symbolic, a turning point that signaled a shift in the balance of power. Harlan, once untouchable, was now vulnerable, exposed, and on notice. Outside, the wind whispered through the training grounds, carrying the faint metallic scent of gunpowder and the distant echoes of exercises. To anyone else, it was just another night at the base. To Alex, it was a moment of quiet triumph, tempered by awareness of what was still to come. He had acted with precision, but the consequences were only beginning to unfold. He allowed himself a brief, private smile. One hand broken, a reputation shattered, a cycle of cruelty interrupted, yet the game was far from over. And Alex Carter, calm, precise, and prepared, was ready for whatever came next. The echoes of Captain Harlan's scream still lingered in Alex Carter's mind as military police converged on the training grounds. Radios buzzed, boots pounded across the concrete, and officers' voices cut through the cold morning air like knives. Soldiers whispered among themselves, some with awe, others with fear. Alex stood calmly, rifle at his side, watching the chaos unfold. He had anticipated every step, every reaction, but the tension of official scrutiny added a new layer of uncertainty. The first wave of questioning was swift. Officers demanded statements, names, times, and sequences. The squad's gazes shifted between Alex and their injured captain. Some avoided eye contact, some quietly supported him, and others trembled, afraid of the repercussions. Alex answered clearly, concisely, with no sign of hesitation. Every fact he recited was precise, every description consistent with the evidence he had meticulously documented. Captain Harlan, bandaged and furious, accused him of insubordination, assault, and reckless behavior. His voice, once commanding and sharp, now quivered with rage and disbelief. "You've crossed every line, Carter. You'll pay for this." But officers noticed something Alex had prepared them for: the undeniable truth in his testimony, the subtle signs of prior sabotage, and the corroborating accounts of soldiers who had quietly suffered under Harlan's authority. Alex's notebook, hidden until now, became central. Page after page detailed rifles sabotaged, drills manipulated, and humiliations deliberately inflicted. Evidence of tampering, cross-referenced with witness accounts, painted a clear picture. Harlan's cruelty was systematic. Officers flipped through the entries, noting the consistency and depth of documentation. Alex's actions, though bold, were no longer reckless. They were part of a larger pattern of accountability. The investigation expanded. Command officers reviewed armory logs, maintenance reports, and drill schedules. Subtle misalignments, previously ignored as clerical errors, now made sense. Rifles had been altered. Drills had been sabotaged. The captain's arrogance and calculated cruelty were on full display. Alex observed silently as the pieces fell into place. He had predicted this moment, the exposure of truth, and yet the tension was palpable. One misstep, one misinterpretation, could reverse everything. Rumors spread through the barracks. Soldiers who had once feared Harlan now whispered their gratitude. Finally, some said quietly. Someone saw it. Others, however, hesitated, still clinging to loyalty or fear of reprisal. Alex moved through the tension with measured calm, absorbing reactions without revealing his emotions. Inside, he allowed a quiet satisfaction to grow, tempered by awareness that the investigation was far from over. Even Harlan's allies within the unit were forced to reckon with the evidence. Officers questioned their own perceptions, surprised by the depth of the sabotage Alex had uncovered. Some tried to defend him, citing moments where Harlan's behavior had crossed visible lines, but the documentation was irrefutable. The captain's reputation, once formidable, began to fracture under scrutiny. Alex sat quietly in the corner of the interrogation room, reviewing every detail of the day, cataloging reactions, and noting every opportunity for leverage. He had anticipated shock, denial, and anger, and each had played out precisely as expected. The officers' faces revealed a mixture of confusion, realization, and growing awareness of Harlan's long history of misconduct. As the investigation continued into the afternoon, Alex reflected on the delicate balance of power. He had acted decisively, striking the captain in a controlled surgical move, yet the fallout was unpredictable. Military bureaucracy was as complex and rigid as any battlefield, and navigating it required patience, strategy, and unflinching attention to detail. Any misstep could jeopardize his own standing, but the evidence he had amassed created a strong foundation. Outside the base, the wind carried a faint chill, a reminder that the day was far from over. Soldiers moved cautiously, whispers of fear and respect intertwining. Alex had anticipated this shift in morale, the subtle realization among the squad that the previously untouchable captain could be challenged. He remained quiet, observing, learning, noting reactions. Every whisper, every glance, every half-hidden smirk added to his understanding of the social terrain he now navigated. At evening, Alex retreated to his bunk, notebook in hand, reviewing the documented evidence and witness statements once more. Each line reinforced the inevitability of Harlan's downfall. Yet even as the tension eased slightly, Alex knew this was not a victory. It was the opening of a battle fought in the shadows, bureaucracy, and legal proceedings. The captain was vulnerable, yes, but powerful allies could still manipulate outcomes. Precision, patience, and careful action remained paramount. Sleep was restless. Alex's dreams replayed the strike in endless variations, sometimes imagining Harlan retaliating, sometimes imagining officers siding with him, sometimes imagining the unit torn apart by scandal. Every scenario sharpened his instincts, refined his mental map, and strengthened his resolve. He was no longer a passive participant. He was the architect of justice, a quiet force shaping the outcome. The following morning brought renewed investigation. Officers cross-referenced testimonies, examined physical evidence, and sought additional witnesses. Soldiers came forward, cautiously, revealing past incidents where rifles had jammed or drills had been manipulated. Alex watched quietly as the narrative shifted, each corroboration reinforcing the case against Harlan. The captain's anger intensified, his shouts no longer commanding respect but revealing desperation. By midday, the scope of the investigation had grown beyond the barracks. Higher-ranking officials were notified, documents filed, and internal audits ordered. Alex's actions, once seen as reckless aggression, were reframed as a courageous response to systemic abuse. Soldiers who had once cowered began to offer quiet support. Whispers of admiration for Alex spread, tempered by awareness of the precarious position he now occupied. Yet despite the progress, tension remained. Every officer, every soldier, every statement carried weight. One misinterpretation, one overlooked detail could jeopardize everything. Alex remained vigilant, cataloging every reaction, anticipating obstacles, and preparing for the inevitable legal and bureaucratic challenges. The investigation was a battlefield of its own, and strategy was as critical as action. As night descended, Alex reflected on the day. Harlan's authority had been fractured, exposed for the first time in months or years. Soldiers who had suffered quietly began to whisper of relief, of hope, of justice finally emerging. But Alex knew the war was far from over. The captain's pride, allies, and bureaucratic maneuvering could still pose threats. Preparation, patience, and precision remained vital. He closed his notebook, tucked it beneath his bunk, and allowed a brief, quiet smile. Justice was in motion, though slow and uncertain. The humiliation he had suffered had been transformed into leverage, evidence, and strategy. And while the investigation would unfold in the days and weeks to come, Alex Carter now understood one truth clearly. Control, when combined with patience and preparation, could overcome arrogance, cruelty, and fear. At dawn, the base was abuzz with quiet murmurs that carried more weight than the morning bugle. Soldiers exchanged glances, their whispers like currents moving through the ranks. The captain's authority was no longer untouchable. Alex Carter, sitting calmly on the edge of his bunk, reviewed his notebook one last time. Every scrap of evidence, every documented act of sabotage, every corroborating statement was ready. The culmination of weeks of observation and meticulous planning had brought him to this point. Military investigators arrived in force. Officers moved with precision, reviewing logs, interviewing witnesses, and analyzing the armory. Every detail Alex had recorded, rifle serial numbers, drill schedules, subtle mechanical anomalies, was scrutinized and verified. The sabotage was undeniable. The evidence was irrefutable. Harlan's cruel manipulations, once whispered rumors and half-believed fears, now lay bare in official records. Harlan, bandaged hand throbbing in rage barely contained, attempted to defend himself. His voice, once booming and commanding, faltered under the weight of corroborated evidence. Officers questioned him relentlessly, cross-referencing every statement, every report, and every witness account. Each lie he offered was exposed immediately, leaving him floundering. The smirk that had once intimidated soldiers was gone. Vulnerability replaced arrogance, and for the first time, Harlan was truly powerless. Alex observed silently. He didn't need to speak. The notebooks, logs, and witness testimonies did the talking. Every action he had taken, every piece of evidence he had gathered, painted a clear picture. Captain Harlan had abused his authority systematically, humiliating and sabotaging soldiers who dared to excel or show independence. The weight of proof was undeniable, and it was all meticulously collected by the very soldier he had tried to break. The unit began to whisper openly, a mix of relief, awe, and disbelief. Soldiers who had once cowered now offered statements, each one aligning with the evidence Alex had painstakingly assembled. "It wasn't just him," murmured Private Daniels, a quiet observer who had been repeatedly humiliated by the captain. "Carter, he was right all along." These whispers spread, creating a quiet wave of support that bolstered Alex's position without a single word from him. Investigators pored over armory records. Rifles previously issued to Alex and other soldiers were tested, examined, and compared against specifications. Every alteration, every misalignment, every subtle sabotage matched the incidents Alex had documented. Technical experts confirmed what Alex had known all along. The manipulations had been deliberate, consistent, and intentional. Harlan's pattern of cruelty was now scientifically proven. Even Harlan's allies could no longer deny it. Officers who had once turned a blind eye were forced to confront the undeniable truth. The captain's arrogance, his long history of subtle intimidation and sabotage, and his carefully constructed facade of control crumbled under scrutiny. The entire unit began to realize that the humiliation they had endured was not random, it was calculated. Alex had exposed it, and the revelation resonated throughout the base. The culmination of evidence led to formal hearings. The documentation Alex had gathered formed the backbone of the case. Each statement, each altered rifle, each documented act of cruelty was presented in detail. Officers listened, reviewed, and cross-checked, ultimately agreeing that Captain Harlan's behavior had been systematic and malicious. Alex's actions, once questioned, were now reframed. His strike had been a controlled response to documented abuse. Throughout the hearings, Alex remained calm, composed, and precise. Every question asked, every challenge presented, he met with clarity. He did not allow emotion to cloud his testimony. Instead, he relied on evidence, methodical observation, and rehearsed recollection. The contrast between his calm professionalism and Harlan's floundering arrogance was stark. The once untouchable captain now seemed like a man unraveling under the weight of his own misconduct. As the hearings concluded, officers confirmed the findings. Captain Harlan would be removed from command, formally charged with misconduct, and his record marked with the findings of sabotage and abuse. The captain's career, once formidable, was now effectively over. Soldiers who had once feared him breathed quietly, relief washing over them. Alex, though not yet free from scrutiny, felt a heavy burden lift. Justice had not only been served, it had been meticulously documented, undeniable, and complete. Yet even as victory emerged, Alex knew the implications of his actions were complex. Some officers quietly resented him, uneasy with the precedent his decisive strike had set. Bureaucracy, political maneuvering, and lingering loyalty to the captain meant that his career still hung in balance. Despite this, the tide had turned. The fear and humiliation that had dominated the unit were replaced with cautious hope and respect for the soldier who had acted decisively when others had faltered. By evening, the barracks were filled with quiet conversations of disbelief, admiration, and newfound respect. Soldiers who had previously whispered in fear now spoke openly of the captain's downfall. "He thought he could break us," said Corporal Mayers quietly. But Carter, he saw it and he acted, with precision, with control. Alex, sitting quietly on his bunk, allowed himself a small, private smile. He had transformed humiliation into leverage, observation into action, and preparation into justice. Outside, the wind swept across the training grounds, carrying faint echoes of drills and distant footsteps. The day's events had shifted the balance of power within the unit. Harlan's shadow had been shattered, and for the first time in months, the soldiers could breathe without fear. Alex's quiet determination, patience, and meticulous planning had turned the tide, yet he remained vigilant. The story was far from over. Bureaucracy, retaliation, and lingering tension meant that the battle for stability and respect was ongoing. As night fell, Alex reviewed his notes one last time, cataloging reactions, anticipating lingering challenges, and preparing for whatever scrutiny or obstacles might still arise. The strike had been decisive, the sabotage exposed, and Harlan's authority shattered, but the path ahead still required precision, awareness, and careful navigation. For Alex Carter, this was not the end of the story. It was the point where quiet strategy met undeniable truth, and the consequences of patience and preparation began to unfold. The morning sun poured over the base, illuminating a unit on edge. Captain Harlan, once the unchallenged authority, now moved with hesitation. His bandaged hand throbbed painfully, a constant reminder of his defeat at Alex Carter's hands. Today was the formal hearing, a culmination of weeks of investigation, testimony, and irrefutable evidence. The officers, serious and deliberate, filed into the room, their eyes reflecting both curiosity and caution. Alex followed, calm, focused, and fully aware of the weight of the moment. The room was tense, every detail amplified. The hum of the fluorescent lights, the shuffle of papers, the quiet murmurs of soldiers lined along the walls. The captain attempted to regain composure, adjusting his uniform and attempting a stern expression. But it faltered under scrutiny, revealing the anxiety he had long hidden behind arrogance and authority. For the first time, he was accountable, not to the unit, but to the undeniable truth. Alex stepped forward when called, notebook in hand. Every word, every statement he made was measured and deliberate. He recounted the sabotage, the humiliation, and the deliberate manipulation of rifles, citing evidence, dates, and patterns. Officers leaned in, eyes scanning his records, nodding at the consistency and precision of his documentation. The contrast between Alex's calm professionalism and Harlan's flustered, defensive responses was stark. Every misstep the captain made was catalogued, every lie exposed. Witnesses from the squad came forward, their voices a mixture of relief and quiet courage. Soldiers who had previously feared retaliation now spoke openly, recounting subtle manipulations, failed drills, and moments of intimidation. Each testimony reinforced Alex's case. The air in the room was thick with tension. Whispers of shock and disbelief circulated. Harlan's reputation, once formidable, was unraveling with every statement. The officers questioned Harlan, but his attempts at defense fell apart under the weight of evidence. Alex's meticulous notes, combined with corroborating testimony, left no room for doubt. Harlan's arrogance, once his greatest weapon, became his undoing. Every calculated cruelty he had inflicted over the months was laid bare, exposing a pattern of systematic abuse. The captain, once untouchable, was now powerless, trapped by his own actions and Alex's careful planning. As the hearing progressed, Alex remained calm. He did not gloat, did not show satisfaction. He knew the value of restraint. The impact was not in anger, but in precision. Every officer in the room saw it. A soldier wronged, methodical, and intelligent, acting not impulsively, but with strategic clarity. Harlan's floundering attempts to redirect blame only strengthened Alex's credibility, further highlighting the stark difference between the two men. When the hearing concluded, the outcome was decisive. Harlan was formally removed from command. His career effectively ended. The evidence was so overwhelming that leniency was impossible. Alex's actions, initially scrutinized as insubordination, were now understood in full context, a controlled, calculated response to systematic abuse. The soldiers who had endured months of intimidation quietly celebrated in relief, their respect for Alex growing with every confirmation of justice. The transformation within the unit was palpable. Fear, once pervasive, was replaced by cautious optimism. Soldiers whispered of hope, of fairness, and of accountability. Corporal Mayers, once hesitant to speak, quietly acknowledged Alex's courage. "You did what none of us could," he said. "You made him answer for everything." Alex nodded subtly, understanding the weight of the responsibility he now carried, not as a commander, but as an exemplar of integrity and courage. Outside the hearing room, Harlan packed his belongings. His allies avoided eye contact, the shame of association pressing heavily upon them. The once feared captain now moved like a man whose world had been overturned, stripped of authority, respect, and credibility. The echoes of his arrogance were replaced by whispers of disbelief and murmured relief. Alex watched quietly from a distance, noting every reaction, every movement, cataloging the subtle shifts in power that had taken place. Back in the barracks, soldiers began to speak freely for the first time in months. Conversations once stifled by fear now flowed openly. Alex moved among them, quiet and measured, acknowledging gratitude with nods rather than words. The respect he garnered was not loud or performative. It was earned, precise, and undeniable. Every soldier who had suffered under Harlan's authority now had a model of courage and intelligence to follow. Yet Alex understood the subtleties of human nature. Not everyone would celebrate openly. Some officers still harbored resentment, cautious of the precedent set by his decisive actions. Political maneuvering within the base meant that his victory, while undeniable, required continued vigilance. Alex's patience and strategy had brought him this far, but he knew the battle for stability, influence, and respect was ongoing. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Alex reflected quietly on the day. Harlan's career had ended, the sabotage was exposed, and the unit was slowly reclaiming trust and morale. Yet the victory was tempered by awareness of the delicate balance he now maintained. His actions had reshaped the hierarchy, disrupted complacency, and demonstrated the power of patience, preparation, and strategic action. Sleep that night was calm but reflective. Alex's mind replayed the events of the day, the captain's faltering authority, the soldiers' testimonies, the officers' scrutiny. Each moment reinforced a critical truth. Courage was not loud or impulsive. It was precise, measured, and strategically applied. He had acted decisively when others hesitated, transforming humiliation and injustice into accountability and respect. Outside, the base was quiet, a rare peace settling over the grounds. Soldiers moved through routines with renewed focus, aware that the rules had shifted. Fear had been replaced by respect and chaos by order restored. Alex, sitting quietly on his bunk, allowed a faint, private smile. The reckoning had arrived, the consequences of patience and preparation had been realized, and the balance of power within the unit had irrevocably changed. Yet, even in victory, Alex understood that leadership, influence, and integrity were ongoing battles. The war within the unit was far from over, but for the first time in months, he felt the quiet satisfaction of justice served, calculated, undeniable, and precise. The humiliation that had once weighed so heavily on him had been transformed, a catalyst for change, a demonstration that courage and intelligence could overcome cruelty and arrogance. Dawn broke over the base with an unusual calm, a stark contrast to the tension that had defined the past weeks. Soldiers moved through the courtyard with quiet purpose, rifles carried with precision rather than fear. The removal of Captain Harlan had shifted the balance of authority, and the atmosphere was different now, lighter, more disciplined, and charged with cautious optimism. Alex Carter walked among them, silent but observant, his eyes noting the subtle changes in posture, in confidence, in the way soldiers held themselves. Barracks, once stifling under Harlan's shadow, felt almost alive. Soldiers spoke openly, exchanging advice, sharing experiences, and even laughing without fear of reprisal. Alex listened, quietly encouraging the shift without overt leadership. His actions had not sought recognition, they had sought justice and integrity, yet the respect he had earned was undeniable. Even the most cautious soldiers looked to him with acknowledgement, some with a quiet smile, others with relieved gratitude. Military police and higher-ranking officers conducted follow-up evaluations. Alex provided additional statements, clarified details, and offered insight into patterns of sabotage. Each contribution reinforced the thoroughness of the investigation, ensuring that Harlan's removal was permanent and that future incidents could be prevented. The bureaucracy, once a potential obstacle, had now become an ally, codifying the lessons of accountability and integrity into official records. Harlan's absence was felt almost immediately. Soldiers who had endured months of subtle humiliation began to perform with newfound confidence. Exercises were smoother, targets were hit more accurately, and mistakes were addressed constructively rather than punitively. The unit had regained cohesion, morale, and focus. The ripple effects of Alex's decisive action transformed more than just the chain of command. They reshaped the culture of the base itself. Alex, however, remained disciplined and measured. He did not allow the satisfaction of victory to cloud his vigilance. He knew that systems could be corrupted, authority abused, and respect manipulated. The difference now was that the unit had seen the consequences of unchecked cruelty. Integrity, courage, and preparation were now tangible forces within the ranks. Alex's role was subtle but pivotal. He was no longer just a soldier. He was an example, a living demonstration that one individual, armed with intelligence and patience, could enact meaningful change. The evenings became quieter, reflective. Soldiers who had once whispered in fear now shared stories openly, recounting the subtle sabotage and humiliation that had previously gone unchallenged. Alex listened, offering counsel without dominance, guidance without arrogance. Each interaction strengthened the culture he had fought to protect: fairness, respect, and accountability. The shadow of Harlan's cruelty lingered only as a cautionary tale. One afternoon, during a routine drill, Alex observed the unit executing maneuvers with precision and confidence. The contrast with the past was stark. Soldiers no longer hesitated under scrutiny, and mistakes were corrected constructively rather than punished maliciously. Alex allowed himself a rare, quiet smile. The transformation was real, tangible, and irreversible. The legacy of Harlan's abuse had been dismantled, replaced with a system grounded in respect and accountability. Word of the event spread beyond the base. Reports reached higher command, highlighting Alex's role in exposing systematic abuse and restoring morale. His actions, initially controversial, were now framed as courageous, calculated, and exemplary. Awards, commendations, and recognition were offered, though Alex accepted them with quiet dignity, aware that the true victory lay not in accolades but in the restored integrity of the unit. Even as recognition came, Alex continued his disciplined routines. Early mornings, meticulous inspections, and patient observation became part of his daily rhythm. He understood that leadership was not granted. It was earned, maintained, and exercised with care. The lessons of humiliation, sabotage, and patience remained vivid in his mind, shaping not only his actions, but also the culture he now helped cultivate. One evening, as the sun set over the training grounds, Alex reflected on the journey. The rifle that had been sabotaged, the humiliation, the strike against Harlan, and the meticulous documentation, all had culminated in transformation. He realized that courage was not just action in the moment, but preparation, observation, and the willingness to act decisively when the moment demanded it. The private who had been humiliated had become a symbol of accountability and integrity. The unit, once fractured by fear and cruelty, now moved with unity and focus. Soldiers trained harder, trusted each other more, and respected their leadership. Alex's quiet influence shaped behavior, culture, and morale. He had proven that one person's preparation, patience, and courage could alter the course of many lives, turning humiliation into strength and chaos into order. As night fell, the base was calm. Soldiers slept, confident in their abilities and the integrity of their chain of command. Alex sat alone on a bench, gazing at the stars above. His thoughts drifted briefly to the past weeks: the humiliation, the anger, the meticulous planning, and the decisive strike. Each moment had been a step toward justice, each action precise, deliberate, and necessary. He allowed himself a rare sense of peace. The final lesson lingered in his mind. Integrity and courage were not always loud, but they were always powerful. One individual, armed with patience, observation, and determination, could stand against cruelty and create lasting change. Alex Carter had not just survived humiliation, he had transformed it into a force that reshaped a unit, exposed corruption, and restored honor. And in that quiet night, with the base finally at peace, Alex knew that the world of the military, harsh, disciplined, and often unjust, was a place where one person's resolve could tip the balance. He had acted decisively, with precision, and had changed the course of lives. Humiliation had been transformed into power, cruelty into accountability, and one private had become a symbol of courage that would not be forgotten.